Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this new series we will be comparing the spells that feature in both D&D and Pathfinder. So join with me as we go through the first 9 spells in our list. These are done alphabetically, which are Acid Arrow, Acid Splash, Alarm, Animal Messenger, Animate Dead, Antimagic Field, Augury, Bane and Banishment. First, let us have a look at how we are actually going to rank these spells. To begin with, we are going to have a look at the level. This is the level of the spell, so obviously a cantrip is going to be accessible earlier than a level 4 spell. Basically, the lower the level, the better. Next, we will have a look at who can access the spell. Now, D&D assigns spells based on your class, whereas Pathfinder assigns spells to a tradition, and traditions are assigned to a class. So basically we're going to have a look at who can access the spells or what classes can access the spells in D&D as opposed to how many different traditions have access to the class in Pathfinder. Then we will have a look at the range and target. So obviously a spell that can be cast at 120 feet away is going to be more versatile than a spell that can only be cast at 60 feet away. Same for the target. If it can target more people, then it's going to be a lot more versatile. Following after that is the casting time. Both D&D and Pathfinder have different ways of handling their action economy, so I've created this little table. You can see a bonus action for D&D is equivalent to a free action for Pathfinder. Reactions are the same in both systems. Then we are going to have one action for Pathfinder is going to be better than one action in D&D. One D&D action is equivalent to 2 actions Pathfinder. Then you have your 3 actions in Pathfinder, followed by how many minutes it takes to cast, how many hours, and how many days. There are not a lot of spells in D&D that takes hours and days, but Pathfinder does actually have a few. Most of them are ritual based. Now we're going to have the casting components. So this is your vocal, your somatic, and your material cost. A spell that only takes a somatic and a vocal component will be better than a spell that takes all 3. There is also a few times where a spell will have a material component and will actually have a cost next to it. So a standard material component, you can have this with your spellcast and focus or a component pouch. However, if a spell has a cost, you must pay the cost either in direct gold or in the actual physical item. So obviously something that has a direct cost is going to be worse than something that just requires a component pouch. Then we are going to have a look at the effect of the spell. For spells that do damage, I'll be calculating the minimum, maximum and average that the spell can do at both level 1 and heightened to your maximum level. For other spells, we will be looking at tiny little nuances within the spell. For the duration, some spells can be lasting indefinitely, some spells will last 1 round, some spells will last multiple rounds. We'll be also having a look at D&D's concentration versus Pathfinder sustained. Next, we'll be having a look at the heightened effect. This heightened effect will be how well it scales and what the maximum effect can be. Finally, we're having a look at the save the spell has. This is how does someone get away from not being attacked by it, such as a dexterity save or a willpower save. When dealing with saves, we do have to have a look at the differences that the systems have. So we take a level 1 character. When you're doing a spell attack, for D&D, the spell attack modifier is your proficiency bonus plus your spellcasting modifier. We are going to assume that your spellcasting modifier is an 18. At level 1, your proficiency will be 2, this gives you a plus 6. For Pathfinder, your spell attack roll is your ability modifier used for spellcasting, same thing, we're going to assume that's an 18, plus your proficiency bonus. Well, proficiencies in Pathfinder are slightly different. You have trained, expert, master, and legendary. The way this is calculated is each level gives you an extra plus 2, so trained is a plus 2, whereas legendary is a plus 8. And you add your character level to that. So for D&D it's plus 6, however Pathfinder, your spell attack actually comes out as a plus 7 as you're adding your level. For spell save DCs, D&D is 8 plus your proficiency bonus plus your spellcasting modifier. So that will give a level 1 character with 18 in their spellcasting modifier a total save DC of 14. Whereas Pathfinder, it is 10 plus your ability modifier plus your proficiency bonus. As we explained earlier, proficiencies will be a plus 3 at level 1, and add in the extra 2, this gives us 3 more for our spell save for a total of 17 for Pathfinder. To put this into perspective, let's have a look at the stable enemy for a level 1 character, the Giant Rat. So a D&D Giant Rat has an armor class of 12 and a hit points of 7. Its saves are -2, +2, 0, -4, 0 and -3. So you can see if I was to do a dexterity save on a level 1 character, the rat is getting a +2, so it will have to roll a 12 in order to save. Whereas if we go with something like an intelligence save at -4, this is basically meaning the rat, in order to save at level 1, has to roll an 18. Pathfinder, the armor class is actually a bit higher. Armor class is once again calculated with your proficiency bonus, meaning you're adding your level. So an armor class of 15, hit points of 8, the saves are the old school style, so fortitude save of +6, reflex save of +7, will save of +3. So you can see Pathfinder with a spell save DC of 17, it means a reflex save, which is the same as a dex save in D&D. You only need to roll a 10 in order to pass it. And willpower, which will be wisdom, you're needing a grand total of 14 in order to pass. And as we go for the spell attack DC, as you can see, a level 1 D&D character had a spell attack proficiency of +6, so an armor class of 12 simply means you need to roll a 6 for your spell attack in order to hit it. Pathfinder, however, it did have a spell attack of 7, which is a little bit higher, but you can see with the higher armor class, you actually will be needing to roll an 8 in order to hit with your spell attack. So while D&D does have lower stats, as you can see everything is generally lower, it makes it a bit easier to hit, and it makes the saves a little bit harder, so you're guaranteed more so to actually hit as a mage than you are in Pathfinder. And just for any heightening spells, we will assume that the character is maximum level 20, so for D&D your proficiency has gone up to 6, and as you can only get maximum of 20 in your spellcasting modifier without any equipment, we'll be assuming that everybody's fighting naked, you are going to have a +5, so 6 + 5 is a spell attack of 11. With the save, it is going to be pretty much the same, 8 + 6 + 5 for a spell save DC of 19. Pathfinder, because you're adding your level in, instead you are actually going to have a proficiency bonus of 28. That is 20 for being a level 20 and 8 for being a legendary spellcaster. Pathfinder, you can also have your spellcasting mod sitting at around 22, which will give you a +6. Obviously you can go a lot higher with items and equipment, but once again the mage is going naked, so this will give you a total of 34 for your spell attack. Your spell save DC should be 10 higher than that, so that's going to be a spell save DC of 44. And let's have a look at a really good level 20 boss. This will be the Ancient Red Dragon. For D&D, their AC is going to be sitting at a 22. If you have a +9, then you'll have to roll a 13 in order to hit. With Pathfinder, the armor class is 45. This is much higher, however, you're only going to be having to roll an 11 to hit, as you have a spell attack of 35. You know, you get the idea of how it's going. So we're going to be taking all that into account when we are handling the saves. So let's have a look at the very first spell on our list, which will be Acid Arrow. D&D's Acid Arrow has the following stats. It is a level 2 spell, cast in time of 1 action, a range of 90 feet. It requires a vocal, somatic and a material cost. However, in this case, a simple component pouch will suffice. The duration is instant. It has a spell attack save of a ranged spell attack, and the damage and effect is acid. It reads, a shimmering green arrow streaks towards a target within range and it bursts into a spray of acid. Make a ranged spell attack against the target. On a hit, the target takes 4d4 acid damage immediately and 2d4 acid damage at the end of its next turn. On a miss, the arrow splashes the target with acid for half as much on the initial damage and no damage at the end of its turn. And at higher levels, when you cast this spell using a slot of 3rd or higher, the damage, both initial and later, is increased by 1d4 for each slot above level 2. This spell is available for wizards, alchemists, and Circle of the Land druids, so this is basically an arcane spell with one particular subclass of the druid having access to it. Now for Pathfinder's Acid Arrow, it's a level 2 spell, its traditions are arcane and primal, it costs 2 actions to cast, and it is a somatic and verbal components. Its range is 120 feet, targeting one creature. You conjure an arrow of acid that continues to corrode the target after it hits. Make a spell attack on the target. On a hit, you deal 3d8 acid damage plus 1d6 persistent acid damage. On a critical hit, double the initial damage but not the persistent damage. And heightened, this heightens every second spell level, so that'll be 4, 6, 8 and 10. And the initial damage is increased by 2d8 and the persistent acid damage is increased by 1d6. So how does it rank? The level, both are available at level 2, which makes this a draw. The access, wizards and alchemists get this, so this is arcane, and one particular subclass of the druid, which is your swamp Circle of the Land. Whereas Pathfinder, both arcane and primal spellcasters get it, which means every druid, every arcane caster, such as your wizards, certain witches, and certain sorcerers will have access to it. So this is a win for Pathfinder here. The target, D&D can target one target at 90 feet, whereas Pathfinder is one target at 120 feet. This is a win for Pathfinder. Casting time, 1 action for D&D and 2 action for Pathfinder. This is a draw. The casting components, it is a vocal, somatic and material for D&D, whereas it's just a vocal and somatic for Pathfinder, so this is a win for Pathfinder. The effect is 4d4 damage plus 2d4 at the end of the next turn on a hit or D&D. Pathfinder is a 3d8 plus a 1d6 persistent. So working the stats on that, for D&D this can do 4 to 14 damage with an average of 10, plus 2 to 8 damage with an average of 5 at the end of the next turn. Pathfinder, it is 3 to 24 damage with an average of 11.5, and a 1d6, which is 1 to 6 and an average of 3.5 for Pathfinder. So this is a win for Pathfinder. The duration is end of next turn for D&D, however the effect for Pathfinder is persistent, which means it'll continue to do that damage until the opponent actually spends actions to wipe the acid off. This does mean occasionally the very next turn the creature can wipe the acid off, but if you've got a smart party that can action lock a character, that character won't be able to spend time to wipe the acid off. They're going to get the persistent damage every turn. Win for Pathfinder. And the heightened, even though D&D heightens at every level, the maximum you can do is 11d4, which is 11 to 44 damage, which is an average of 27.5, with the end of the next turn doing 9d4 damage. That is 9 to 36, average of 22.5. Pathfinder, it is every second level, but remember Pathfinder has level 10 spells, so at level 20 you'll be doing 11d8 damage, which is 11 to 88. This is an average of 49.5, and the persistent damage will be 5d6, which is between 5 to 30, average of 17.5. This is definitely a win for Pathfinder. The save, it is an attack roll, but on a miss you're still doing half the damage, whereas Pathfinder, its save is also an attack roll. You get extra damage as a crit. D&D you get extra damage as a crit anyway, however on a miss you're doing no damage, so this is a win for D&D. So for the very first spell, Acid Arrow, this is a win for Pathfinder. You can fire it off further and you do way more damage, and it will take less components to cast. D&D, its only saving grace is it does half damage on a miss. So a win for Pathfinder. Moving to the second spell in our list, Acid Splash. So for D&D, this is a cantrip. It has a casting time of 1 action, a range of 60 feet, it only requires a vocal and a somatic component. Its duration is instantaneous, it requires a dex save to save, and it does acid damage again. You hurtle a bubble of acid. Choose 1 or 2 creatures you can see within range. If you choose 2, they must be within 5 feet of each other. A target must succeed on a dexterity saving throw or take 1d6 acid damage. The spell's damage increases by 1d6 when you reach 5th level, 11th level and 17th level. And this is available for sorcerers, wizards and artificers, so this makes it generally an arcane spell. Pathfinder Acid Splash is also a cantrip. It is for the traditions of Arcane and Primal. However, a subclass of the Sorcerer, the Demonic Bloodline, also gets access to it. Its casting cost is 2 actions and it requires somatic and verbal components. Its range is 30 feet and it targets 1 creature. So, you splash a glob of acid that splatters your target and nearby creatures. Make a spell attack. If you hit, you deal 1d6 acid damage plus 1 splash acid damage. On a critical success, that target also takes 1 persistent acid damage. So this is doing splash damage to every creature surrounding it. And it is heightened every 3rd, 5th, 7th and 9th level. At 3rd it does an extra 1d6 plus your spellcasting modifier, and persistent damage is increased to 2 on a crit. At 5th it is 2d6 plus your spellcasting modifier, persistent damage is 3 and splash damage is 2, and it will just keep increasing the higher the level you cast it at. So ranking both these spells, they are both a cantrip, which means they're both accessible for a level 1 starting character. The access, it is a sorcerer and a wizard and an artificer for D&D. The access for Pathfinder is arcane and primal. This makes it every druid, every wizard and most witches, as well as the demonic bloodline for sorcerers, which is usually restricted to the divine cast. This makes it a win for Pathfinder. The range and target, well, D&D actually targets 2 creatures at 60 feet, whereas Pathfinder only targets 1 creature with splash damage, but it's 30 feet. This is a win for D&D. Casting time is 1 action for D&D, 2 actions for Pathfinder. This is a draw. Casting components are both verbal and somatic, so this is once again a draw for both. The effects for D&D is a straight 1d6, which has a range damage of 1 to 6 and an average of 3.5, whereas Pathfinder, it is the same base damage, but it will do the 1 splash damage. I'm going to give this one to D&D as it can actually target 2 creatures with the 1d6, whereas Pathfinder, every surrounding creature will do 1 damage. You're not going to get 8 other creatures surrounding it, so all up the effect actually does more for D&D. Duration, on a critical hit you get persistent damage for Pathfinder, whereas you get nothing for D&D, so Pathfinder has a higher chance of doing better durations. Heightening the spell, at the maximum level, at 17th level you can cast it for D&D, it will be doing 4d6, which is 4 to 24 damage, which is an average of about 14. Whereas Acid Splash for Pathfinder, it will be doing 4d6 plus your spellcasting mod, which by level 20 you should have a spellcasting mod of 6, so this gives it a range of 10 to 30 with an average of about 20 at 17th level. Don't forget you also get a lot more persistent damage as well as a lot more splash damage. This will be a win for Pathfinder. And the save, it is a spell attack versus a dexterity save. As we went over it, yes, you have a higher spell attack with Pathfinder, but armor classes are much higher, whereas dexterity saves aren't quite as much. So that is a win for D&D. So tallying this up, this is actually 6 points for each. So the winner for here is none. Both are a draw. Both are pretty usable at a level 1 character as a cantrip. 1 draw for each. This gives Pathfinder a win and 1 draw. Okay, so the next spell on our list is Alarm. For D&D, Alarm is a 1st level spell. It takes 1 minute to cast, but if you are a ritual caster, you can spend 10 minutes and cast it without a spell slot usage. It has a range of 30 feet, and it requires vocal, somatic and material components. However, it'll just use a component pouch. The duration is 8 hours, it has no save with it, and it is a detection spell. So you set an alarm against unwanted intrusion. Choose a door, a window or an area within range that is no larger than a 20-foot cube. Until the spell ends, an alarm alerts you when a teeny or large creature touches or enters the warded area. When you cast the spell, you can designate creatures that won't set off the alarm. You also choose whether the alarm is mental or audible. A mental alarm alerts you with a ping in your mind if you are within 1 mile of the warded area. This ping awakens you if you are sleeping. An audible alarm produces the sound of a handbell for 10 seconds within 60 feet. and this is available for rangers, wizards, artificers, and Oath of the Watcher paladins. Now, Alarm in Pathfinder is also a level 1 spell. It is the first spell we have that is available to every spellcaster. It will take 10 minutes to cast, and it requires material, somatic, and verbal components, and the requirements are actually 3 gold worth of silver bell focuses. So this spell has an actual physical cost to it. Its range is touch, and it does a 20-foot burst area, and once again the duration is 8 hours. You ward an area to alert you when a creature enters it without your permission. When you cast Alarm, select a password. Whenever a small or larger corporeal creature enters the spell's area without speaking the password, an alarm sends your choice of a mental alert, in which case the spell gains the mental trait, or an audible alarm with the sound and volume that of a handbell, in which case it gains an audible trait. Either option automatically awakens you, and the bell allows each creature in the area to attempt a DC 15 perception check to wake up. A creature aware of the alarm must succeed a stealth check against the spell's DC or trigger the spell when moving into the area. And if you heighten it and cast it at 3rd level, you can specify criteria for which creatures sound the alarm spell. For instance, you can choose orcs or masked people. So ranking the spells, both spells are available at level 1. So that is a draw. The access, rangers, wizards, artificers, and Oath of the Watcher paladins can get it for D&D, whereas everybody has access to it in Pathfinder. Clear win for Pathfinder here. The range and target, D&D has 30 feet and a target, so you can cast it at a distance, but you must target something. Whereas Pathfinder, it's touch, but you can touch any item. And the actual range of the spell on both is a 20-foot item. I'm going to kind of give this a draw for both of them, simply because you can target anything with Pathfinder, as opposed to D&D you have to target something specifically, but it's a range. They're both sort of versatile, so it's kind of a draw for both. Casting time, Pathfinder takes a whole 10 minutes to cast, whereas D&D is simply 1 minute. If you want to cast it without a spell slot, you can take 10 minutes and then you're not wasting a spell slot for it. Clear win for D&D for this one. Casting components both require a vocal, somatic, and a material component. However, Pathfinder actually has a cost to it, so this means a win for D&D. The effect, both have pretty much the same effect. If a creature enters the area, it sets off the alarm. That's the effect, and both are a draw. Duration, both last 8 hours, so that's easy. It's a draw. Now the heightened effect, D&D doesn't heighten. Once you cast the spell, that's it. Whereas Pathfinder cast it at a level 3, and you can actually specify the criteria of what creatures trigger the alarms. So you could have an area that will only trigger if orcs enter. Everybody else can freely enter, the spell doesn't go off. So I'm going to call this a win for Pathfinder, as it actually has a heightened effect. D&D doesn't. And the save, D&D has no save. If the creature goes in, it triggers the spell, whereas Pathfinder, if the creature is aware that the spell is there, in which both systems you have detect magic, so both systems have a way to know whether the actual alarm is there, people can actually walk into the area and not set it off with a spell check. So as D&D has no save, I'm going to give this a direct win for D&D. So with a score of 7 versus 6, D&D pulls a win out of this one. So 1 win for both and a draw. Next one on our list is Animal Messenger. In D&D, Animal Messenger is a 2nd level spell. It takes 1 action to cast, but it is also a ritual spell, so spend 10 minutes, you don't have to waste a spell slot. It has a range of 30 feet, and it requires vocal, somatic, or material components. That requires no cost. The duration is 24 hours, and there is no save. By means of this spell, you use an animal to deliver a message. Choose a teeny beast you can see within range, such as a squirrel, blue jay, or a bat. You specify a location, which you must have visited, and a recipient who matches a general description, such as a man or woman dressed in the uniform of a town guard, or a red-headed dwarf wearing a pointed hat. You also speak a message of up to 25 words. The target beast travels for the duration of the spell towards the specific location, covering about 50 miles per 24 hours for a flying messenger, or 25 miles for other animals. When the messenger arrives, it delivers your message to the creature that you described, replicating the sound of your voice. The messenger speaks only to the creature matching the description you gave. If the messenger doesn't reach its destination before the spell ends, the message is lost, and the beast makes its way back to where you cast the spell. And at higher levels, if you cast the spell using a slot of 3rd level or higher, the duration increases by 48 hours for each slot above 2nd level. And this is available for bards, druids and rangers, so this sort of makes it more a primal spell. Animal Messenger for Pathfinder is also a level 2 spell. It is available only for the primal tradition. Casting time is 1 minute and it requires a material, somatic and verbal component. The range is 120 feet and the duration varies. So you offer a gift of food. An ordinary teeny wild animal within range approaches it and eats it. You imprint the image, direction and distance of an obvious place or landmark well known to you within the animal. Optionally, you can attach a small object or a note of light bulk to it. The animal does its best to reach the destination, and if it makes it there, it waits nearby until the duration expires, allowing other non-hostile creatures to approach it and remove the attached object. The spell ends after 24 hours or when the creature removes the attached object, whichever comes first. If there is no teeny wild animals in range, the spell is lost. So the rankings for this, both are a level 2 spell, therefore this is a draw. Now access, for Pathfinder, only primal casters can actually have access to it, whereas D&D, the Druid and Ranger, which are your primal casters, have access to it. However, Bards also have access to it, so I'm giving this a win for D&D. For the range, each have one target, however Pathfinder is 120 feet, D&D is 30 feet, so this will be a win for Pathfinder. Casting time, it is 1 action for D&D, however it can be cast as a ritual spell. Casting time for Pathfinder is 2 actions. I'm going to give this a win for D&D simply because it has the ritual tag, which means you can cast it for 10 minutes without a spell slot. Casting components both require a vocal, somatic and material, and neither have an actual cost to it, so this is a draw. Now for the effect, both technically send a message via an animal, however D&D you can actually send an auditorial message, whereas Pathfinder you can't. In D&D, when you speak the message, the animal will repeat it back in your voice, so I'm going to give this one a win for D&D. Both have a duration of 24 hours, this is a draw. The heightened version for D&D, you can actually heighten it by 48 hours per spell slot. I'm going to give this a win for D&D, and neither require a save, so that's a draw. So with a score of 8 versus 5, D&D takes its second victory. Now, for Animate Dead, for all you necromancers out there. So for D&D, Animate Dead is a 3rd level spell. It will take you 1 minute to cast, and it has a range of 10 feet. You require a vocal, somatic and a material component, but there is no cost in this. The duration is instant, and there is no save. So this spell creates an undead servant. Choose a pile of bones or a corpse of a medium or small humanoid within range. Your spell imbues the target with the foul mimicry of life, raising it as an undead creature. The target becomes a skeleton if you chose bones, or a zombie if you chose a corpse. On each of your turns, you can use an action to mentally command any creature you made with this spell if the creature is within 60 feet of you. If you control multiple creatures, you can command all of them at the same time, issuing the same command to each of them. You decide what action the creature will take and where it will move during its next turn. Or you can issue a general command, such as guard a particular chamber or corridor. If you issue no commands, the creature only defends itself against hostile creatures. Once you give an order, the creature continues to follow it until its task is complete. The creature is under your control for 24 hours, after which it stops obeying any command you give it. To maintain control of the creature for another 24 hours, you must cast the spell on the creature again before the current 24-hour period ends. This use of the spell reasserts your control of up to over 4 creatures that you have animated with the spell, rather than just animating a new one. And at high levels, when you cast the spell using a slot of 4th level or higher, you animate or reassert control of 2 additional creatures for each slot above 3rd. Each of the creatures must come from a different corpse pile or a pile of bones. And this is available for clerics, wizards, death domain clerics get it for free, Circle of Spore druids get it, and the Oathbreaker paladin. For Pathfinder, this is a 1st level spell, making it a lot earlier for spellcasters to have access to it. Its traditions are arcane, divine and occult, meaning more people also have access to it. It takes 3 actions to cast and it requires material, somatic and verbal components. The range is 30 feet and it can be sustained for up to 1 minute. So your magic dredges up a corpse or a skeleton and fills it with necromantic life, and you force the dead to fight at your command. You summon a creature that has the undead trait and whose level is -1. This creature gains the summoned trait. Heightening the spell increases the maximum level of creatures you can summon. So at level 2 you can summon a level 1 creature, level 3 a level 2, and so forth right up to casting it at a level 10th spell slot. You can summon a level 15 undead creature. And we can see here a nice table of what creatures you can summon at what levels. So the rankings for this one, at D&D you have access to it at level 3, whereas Pathfinder you have access to it at level 1, meaning Pathfinder's the winner. For the access, only clerics and wizards get it, with the Deathdomain cleric getting it for free, and the Circle of Spores druid and the Oathbreaker paladin also have an access to it. Whereas Pathfinder, arcane, divine and occult practitioners can all cast the spell. So once again, win for Pathfinder. The range and target. D&D it is 1 target at 10 feet, whereas Pathfinder it is 1 target at 30 feet, given a win for Pathfinder. The casting time, D&D is a minute, so this pretty much makes it not usable in combat, otherwise you're going to be out of action for at least 10 rounds, whereas Pathfinder it's 3 actions, basically taking up 1 round to cast it, win for Pathfinder. For the casting components, both require a vocal, somatic and material cost with no actual physical cost attached, so this is a draw. The effect is for D&D raise a skeleton or a zombie, whereas Pathfinder it is raise a level -1 undead. I'm actually going to give this a draw. As you saw the table, there are lots of different things you can create with the undead spell, but a skeleton and zombie does take effect at around level 3, so they kind of match power to power when you can first access them. However, the duration, Pathfinder you can sustain it up to only a minute. With Pathfinder, when you sustain a spell, you take one of your actions to maintain control of said spell. If you have no actions to take, the spell is lost and the undead will die. This is effectively Pathfinder's version of concentration. For D&D, the duration lasts a whole 24 hours, and if you recast it before the 24 hours are up, you continue to control up to 4 undead. So this is a win for D&D. Now the heightened spell. Each spell gives you a +2 undead per spell level for D&D, meaning you can raise more zombies. But Pathfinder, you can raise way more powerful monsters. So D&D is sort of pointing you towards being a necromancer, having a huge army behind you, whereas Pathfinder is saying, hey, this is a combat spell. The higher the level you cast it at, the more powerful undead, and you can use it directly in combat to throw a meat shield against an enemy. I'm sort of in 2 minds about it, so I'm actually going to give this a draw. And finally, the save. Neither require a save, so this is a draw. So I did take this particular spell to both the Pathfinder and D&D Facebook communities. The Pathfinder community did remind me that there is actually a ritual which lets you create permanent undead minions, and that this spell is more related as a combat spell for instant use, throwing a meat shield at people, which makes it a much more powerful spell. So they voted that the Pathfinder spell was more powerful. The D&D community basically said this isn't relative to the D&D game and blocked me from being able to ask the question. So with a ranking of 5-1 in Pathfinder's favour, this is Pathfinder's second victory. And now we move on to Antimagic Field. Okay, so Antimagic Field is a level 8 spell for D&D, and wizards and clerics have access to the spell. The casting time is 1 action, and you cast it on yourself with a 10-foot radius. The components are vocal, somatic and material, but no actual cost. Duration lasts for an hour, but this requires concentration. And there is no save. This is a bit of a long description, but a 10-foot radius invisible sphere of anti-magic surrounds you. This area is devoid from the magical energy that suffuses the multiverse. Within the sphere, a spell can't be cast, summoned creatures disappear, and even magical items become mundane. Until the spell ends, the sphere moves with you and is centered on you. The spell and other magical effects, except those created by an artifact or a deity, are suppressed in the sphere and can't be procured into it. A slot expended to cast the suppressed spell is consumed. While the effect is suppressed, it doesn't function, but the time it's been suppressed counts against its duration. And then there are a whole heap of sub-options available to it, so we won't go into that, otherwise this video will go on forever. The Pathfinder version is also a level 8 spell, but has a lot less reading to go with it. Its traditions are Arcane, Divine and Occult. It takes 3 actions to cast and requires material, somatic and verbal components. The area is a 10-foot emanation which affects you, and it is sustained for up to 1 minute. You repel all magic from the target area, preventing spells and other magic from functioning. Spells can't penetrate the area, magic items cease to function within it, and no one inside can cast a spell or use magical items. Likewise, spells such as Dispel Magic can't affect the field unless they are of a higher level. Magic effects resume the moment they pass outside the field. For example, a ray fired from one side of the field could target a creature on the other side, as long as the caster and target are both outside the field. A summoned creature winks out of existence but reappears if the field moves or ends. Invested magic items cease to function, but they remain invested and resume functioning when they exit the field. The ability boost from an Apex item isn't suppressed within the field. Spells of a high level in the Antimagic Field overcome its effects and can be cast even by a creature within the field, so level 9 and 10 spells aren't affected. And the field disrupts only magic, so a +3 longsword still functions as a longsword. Magically created creatures such as golems function normally within the Antimagic Field. So for the rankings, both systems have the spell set at level 8, so that is a draw. For its access, D&D has only clerics and wizards able to cast Antimagic Field, whereas Arcane, Divine and Occult practitioners can all cast it, so it's a win for Pathfinder. Both systems have a 10-foot sphere around the caster. Casting time, it's only 1 action for D&D, yet it's 3 actions for Pathfinder, so D&D wins here. Both systems have vocal, somatic and material components with no cost, so that's a draw. For the effect, both of them create an anti-magic field around you. However, Pathfinder, you can actually destroy the effect, and spells level 9 and 10 are not affected by the anti-magic field. So I'm actually going to give this one a win for D&D. A level 9 Dispel spell will end an anti-magic field, so D&D wins here. Duration, D&D concentrates for an hour, whereas Pathfinder concentrates for a minute. I'm going to give this for D&D because that's a whole hour of anti-magic field. Yes, you have to be concentrating for an hour, but if the mage is just trying to concentrate on that spell, that's all they have to do, then a whole hour is actually better than wasting 60 8-level slots, which I don't think any mage in Pathfinder can have, so a win for D&D. And neither system heightens or has saves, so I'm going to give this a draw for both of them. So, with a score of 8-6 in D&D's favour, this is D&D's third win. Now we're going to move to the spell Augury. So, Augury is a 2nd level spell for D&D. Its casting time is 1 minute, but if you use 10 minutes it is a ritual and it can be cast without a slot being used. The range and target is self, and its components are vocal, somatic and material with a cost of 25 gold. The duration is instant, and this is a divination spell. By casting gem inlaid sticks, rolling dragon bones, laying out ornate cards, or employing some other divining tool, you receive an omen from an outerworldly entity about the results of a specific course of action that you plan to take within the next 30 minutes. The DM chooses from the following possible omens: Wheel for a good result, Woe for a bad result, Wheel or Woe for both good and bad results, Nothing for results that aren't especially good or bad. And there are special nuances to the spell, such as every time you cast it, there is a 25% chance you get a random reading. Just little things like that. And it is castable by clerics. Knowledge domain clerics get it for free, and the Path of the Open Sea, I don't recognise that. I think that's Unearthed Arcana. For Pathfinder, Augury is also a 2nd level divination spell. It is done by the Divine and the Occultic practitioners, and its casting time is 10 minutes requiring material, somatic and verbal components. And it pretty much reads the exact same results. You gain a vague glimpse into the future. During the casting of the spell, ask about the result of a particular course of action. The spell can predict the results up to 30 minutes in the future and reveal the GM's best guess among the following outcomes: wheel for good, woe for bad, wheel and woe for mixed, nothing for nothing. The GM rolls a secret DC 6 flat check. On a failure, the result is always nothing, making it impossible to tell whether a nothing result is accurate or not. So for the results, both are level 2 spells, so this is a draw. For the access, D&D has it as a cleric spell only, with the knowledge domain getting it for free, whereas divine and occultic practitioners get it for Pathfinder, meaning this is a win for Pathfinder. Both have a range and target of self, and a casting time. For D&D it is 1 minute, Pathfinder it is 10 minutes, so on that basis alone D&D wins. However, if you want to spend 10 minutes casting it, it doesn't cost a spell slot as it is a ritual, so D&D definitely wins out on this. The casting components both have a verbal, somatic and material component, however D&D has a 25 gold cost to it, so Pathfinder wins. The effects for both is gain a vague glimpse into the future, however I'm giving this to D&D because of the straight DC 6 flat check. If the DM rolls a d20 and gets a 1 to 5, then the result is always going to be nothing, whether the result was nothing or not. So on that basis alone, D&D will win. And then the duration, the heightened and the save is all the same for both, so that is a draw. With 7 apiece, this is pretty much a draw for both systems. Both systems have their ups and downs with this spell, but the end result is you spend 10 minutes, you cast Augury, you get a result. So this is a draw for both of them. Now we're moving into every Dark Cleric's and every Fallen Paladin's favourite spell, Bane. So Bane is a first level spell for D&D. It takes 1 action to cast and it has a range of 30 feet. It has the components of vocal, somatic and material, and it lasts 1 minute with concentration. And there is a charisma save attached to this. So up to 3 creatures of your choice that you can see within range must make a charisma saving throw. Whenever a target that fails the saving throw makes an attack roll or a saving throw before the spell ends, the target must roll a d4 and subtract the number rolled from the attacking or saving throw. And at higher levels, when you cast this spell at a slot of 2nd level or higher, you can target 1 additional creature for every slot. So bards and clerics get this spell, Grave Domain clerics get it for free, Oath of Vengeance paladins also get access to this spell, and the Undead Warlock also has access to this spell. Bane for Pathfinder is also a level 1 spell. It is a divine and occultic spell, so pretty much the same as D&D. Your bards and your clerics are going to get access to it. It is a 2 action cast and it's a somatic and verbal components required. It is a 5-foot emanation targeting yourself. The saving throw is will, and it lasts for 1 minute without having to concentrate. You fill the minds of your enemies with doubt. Enemies in the area must succeed at a will save or take a -1 status penalty to attack rolls as long as they are in the area. Once per turn, starting the turn after you cast Bane, you can use a single action which has the concentrate trait to increase the emanation's radius by 5 feet and force enemies in the area that weren't yet affected to attempt another saving throw. Bane can counteract Bless. So this is a very close one, but let's have a look at its final rankings. Both are accessible at level 1, so this will be a draw. For D&D, it is primarily a Bard and Cleric spell, with the Oath of the Vengeance Paladin and the Undead Warlock also having access to it. In Pathfinder, this is a Divine and Occult spell, pretty much the same, Occultic as Bard, Divine as Cleric, so I'm giving this also a draw. The range and target. For D&D, this is 3 creatures within 30 feet, whereas Pathfinder, this is a 5-foot sphere around the caster. I'm actually going to give this to D&D because if you're not a cleric that has heavy armor, and bards also don't have access to heavy armor, in order for you to make use of this spell, you're actually going to have to be in the midst of combat. Whereas D&D, you can cast this spell at a range on 3 specific targets and ping them for it. So this is a win for D&D. Casting time, 1 action for D&D, 2 actions for Pathfinder, this will be a draw. casting components, D&D requires vocal, somatic and material, whereas Pathfinder is only vocal and somatic, therefore this is a win for Pathfinder. The effect, D&D has a minus D4 on attacks or saving throws, so this will give you a range of -1 to -4 with an average of about 2.5, and this affects attacks and saving throws. Whereas Pathfinder, it is simply a -1 penalty to attack rolls. This is clearly a win for D&D. The duration, D&D requires you to concentrate for 1 minute to maintain the spell, whereas Pathfinder, the spell is active for 1 minute, it doesn't require concentration. This is a win for Pathfinder. The heightened version of the spells, Pathfinder has no heightened version, whereas D&D, you can target additional creatures per spell level. A clear win for D&D, you can start targeting entire armies at higher levels. And the save, it is a charisma save versus a will save. I'm actually going to call this a draw. It is slightly skewed more into D&D's favour, with not a lot of creatures having a high charisma, but a will save is also a pretty low save for most creatures, so I will call this a draw for the both of them. So this is very close, but D&D just edges it out with 7 points. This is mainly relating to the effect and the heightened, whereas Pathfinder has a better duration. Next we move on to the last spell in our list for today. This is Banishment. So Banishment for D&D is a 4th level spell. It takes 1 action to cast, and it has a range of 60 feet. The components are vocal, somatic and material, but there is no major cost. The duration is concentration for 1 minute, and it requires a charisma save. You attempt to send one creature that you can see within range to another place of existence. The target must succeed on a charisma saving throw or be banished. If the target is native to the plane of existence you're on, you banish the target to a harmless demiplane. While there, the target is incapacitated. The target remains there until the spell ends, at which point the target reappears in the space it left or the nearest unoccupied space if the space is occupied. If the target is native to a different plane of existence than the one you're on, the target is banished with a faint popping noise returning to its home plane. If the spell ends before 1 minute has passed, i.e. if the caster loses concentration, the target reappears in the space it left or the nearest unoccupied space if that space is occupied. Otherwise, the target simply doesn't return. And at higher levels, when you cast this spell using a slot of 5th level or higher, you can target 1 additional creature for every slot above level 4. And this is available for clerics, paladins, sorcerers, warlocks, wizards, and the Oath of Vengeance Paladin and Oath of the Crowned Paladin and Oath of the Watcher's Paladin all get this for free. For Pathfinder, this is a level 5 spell. However, it is available for all traditions, Arcane, Divine, Occult and Primal. It takes 2 actions to cast and requires a somatic and verbal component. The range is 30 feet and it targets 1 creature that isn't on its home plane. The saving throw for this is Will. You send the target back to its home plane. The target must attempt a Will save. You can spend an extra action while casting this spell and add a material component to give the creature a -2 circumstance penalty to its save. The component must be a specially gathered object that is anathema to the creature, and not from the material component pouch. This spell fails if you aren't on your home plane when you cast it. So, with the Will save and throw, if the creature gets a critical success, the target resists being banished, and you as the caster are stunned for 1. If the target makes a success, the target resists being banished. If it makes a fail, the target is banished as per normal, and on a critical fail, the target is banished and can't return by any means to the plane it's banished from for 1 week. And if you cast this spell at level 9, you can target up to 10 creatures. The extra material component affects targets to which it is anathema. So basically, it doesn't heighten every level, it just heightens at level 9, where you can cast it on 10 individual creatures. Right, and the rankings for Banishment. D&D, this is a level 4 spell, whereas Pathfinder, this is a level 5th spell, so D&D wins here. The access, clerics, paladins, sorcerers, warlocks and wizards all have access to this, whereas Pathfinder, every spellcaster will have access to it. So I'm going to give this to Pathfinder. The range and target. For D&D, this targets one creature at 60 feet. Pathfinder, it only targets one creature that is not on its home plane for 30 feet. So if you're trying to banish a bandit lord and you're on the prime material plane, no luck there. It can only target creatures that aren't on its home plane, and it has a range of 30 feet. Clear win for D&D here. Casting time, 1 action for D&D, 2 actions for Pathfinder. This is a draw. Casting components, vocal, somatic, and material for D&D. It's just vocal and somatic for Pathfinder, so this is a win for Pathfinder. The effect, D&D, you banish the target. For Pathfinder, you send the target back to its home plane. I'm going to call this a win for D&D. Banishing any target, whether it's on its home plane or not, is way more versatile than simply sending one target not on its home plane back. Duration, well, this one, it is concentrate for a minute for D&D. If the target is on its home plane, then it will simply pop back into existence. If it's not on its home plane and you maintain concentration, then it can't come back. Whereas Pathfinder, it really depends on the success. If the target fails a will save, then it is banished and it has to find its own way back onto the material plane, or onto the plane you're banishing it from. So this could be helpful. Sometimes they may have a spell that can let them come back within a second or within the very next turn if they have access to it. Other times they may have to go and find the components for that spell to be able to teleport back into this plane. It really depends. However, if they get a critical failure, then they are banished for 1 week before they can make an attempt to come back. I'm actually going to give this to D&D. The rules seem a lot more simplified for it, and in this case I think simpler is better. So for the heightened version of this spell, 1 additional creature for each spell level above level 4 for D&D, versus no heightening until you get to level 9, and then you get 10 creatures. If we were going to be going with every level, then D&D does win this, but the rules are for a character who can cast it to begin with, versus a level 20 character heightening it to its maximum. On this basis, Pathfinder wins, being able to banish more creatures at 9th level. And the saves are a charisma versus a will. Same as with the previous spell, I'm going to give this one a draw. So, with a score of 6 versus 5, this is yet another win in D&D's favour. If I was playing a caster who had access to this spell, I would use it in D&D. However, I'd only really use it if I was a wizard or a witch in Pathfinder, as they have a spell book. You know, I don't honestly think it's usable for spontaneous casters because it's just too circumstantial for Pathfinder to use. It is a powerful spell in Pathfinder, but it's just too circumstantial. D&D, it's much easier to use, so this will be a win for D&D. And the total scores, we can see Pathfinder wins with Acid Arrow and Animate Dead. D&D wins with Alarm, Animal Messenger, Antimagic Field, Bane and Banishment. And the spells Acid Splash and Augury are a draw. So we can kind of make out from this, direct combat spells seem to be better or seem to be skewed in Pathfinder's favour, whereas utility spells such as Bane, Banishment, Messenger, that sort of stuff are better in D&D. I'm not saying anyone is objectionably worse, a lot of them were really, really close, but yeah, D&D wins this particular round. So join me next week as we go through the next 9 levels, as we go through the next 9 spells. It won't be as long as this one because I won't be going through all the rankings and giving an explanation. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, ka kite anō, and have a good week. If you like this video, then please like, share and leave a comment. If you have another topic you'd like me to cover, write that down in the comments and I'll look into that for you. But thank you for watching. Please subscribe, as that's the best way to help grow this channel, and you can also support this channel through Patreon and joining us at Discord. So, thank you very much and farewell.